to Gulbenkian Foundation and to the Templeton Foundation for giving me the opportunity to present a joint paper by Matthis Krischel, who will be also glad to answer questions after that, and myself. In our presentation, we would like to present a few selected research results of the joint project you already mentioned that was conducted at the universities of Düsseldorf and Germany and Ulm in Germany in the years 2009 to 2012. Our paper is focused on findings from the History of the Sciences section of this project. And we want to highlight reticulations between scholars of different academic disciplines in the formation of different theories of evolution from the 18th to the 20th centuries and point out different ideas of horizontal and lateral transfer. When we look at models of biological and cultural evolution that developed from the 19th century onward, we can see clearly that they were characterized by two main features. First, they were mostly centered on the unilinear transmission of cultural and biological replicators, languages, among others, and all these theories were centered on phylogenetic images of descent. That means specifically the tree of life and the tree of languages, metaphors you are most likely all acquainted with. This claim shall be testified by a look at the prevailing models of evolutionary descent, first in linguistics, second in biology, and third in cultural and social anthropology. We will first present examples for the phylogenetic visualization of evolutionary processes in biology, linguistics, and anthropology, specifically pedigrees in linguistics, imaging the unilinear evolution of languages, and we will focus on the tree of life model visualizing the unilinear evolution in species. We will then outline the history of evolutionary thought in sociology and anthropology, laying claim to the unilinear evolution of cultures, and then turn to antidotes, so to speak, to evolutionism. That means to the theory of endobiosis in biology, to alternatives to the phylogenetic model of language origin, and finally, we will turn to trends in cultural and social anthropology, which emphasized the diffusion of culture traits instead of vertical inheritance. As a remarkable fact, we can see that the image of the pedigree of languages is older than the tree of life image. In the late 18th century, Félix Gaillet drew an early tree of languages depicting their origin in a common langue primitive. At this time, the typical imaging of relationships between biological species was network-centered, not pedigree-centered, and examples for this are sketches by Auguste Bach and earlier, middle of the 18th century, by Georges Buffon, showing the different races of dogs. With the development of comparative linguistics during the 19th century, and due to the works of William Jones, Franz Bopp, Christian Rusk, Jakob Grimm, the idea that all Indo-European languages originated in a common proto-language was established as a default theory. The development of the Indo-European languages was increasingly visualized in a pedigree fashion since that time. Already in 1853, that means 6 years before Charles Darwin published his Origin of Species, August Schleicher presented an early language tree representation. And this phylogenetic representation was probably inspired by a quite similar image drawn by František Ladislav Černátovský, which is shown here, whom Schleicher worked together with in Prague. Since then, the tree model has become the standard visualization of the development of Indo-European languages, as well as other language families as well, even in more recent attempts in mathematic modeling language evolution, one example here being from Mark Pagel. In biology, the idea of unilinear descent of species by matters of natural selection in the struggle for life gained increasing acceptance in the second half of the 19th century, and was then also applied to human evolution. Although Charles Darwin hardly drew any pedigree image or any image that can be identified as a true tree of descent, here we have his famous sketch, I think. The followers of Charles Darwin did, especially the German zoologist Ernst Haeckel, who was the main popularizer of Darwin's theory in Central Europe. Since then, the tree of life image has become the standard visualization of biological evolution, even in those revised images that acknowledge to a certain degree lateral or horizontal transfer as one among several factors in biological evolution. Looking at evolutionary thought in cultural and social anthropology, we can see that the new discipline of culturally orientated anthropology first split from physical anthropology in the middle of the 19th century and was then developed as an independent scholarly discipline under different labels such as ethnology, Völkerkunde, social and cultural anthropology, due to the work of Gustav Friedrich Klemm, Adolf Bastian, Bachhofen, Edward Burnett Tyler, Lewis Morgan, and Fraser, just to name a few of them. And having a look at these faces, we can see that all of these early cultural and social anthropologists were stiff evolutionists, subscribing to a model of development from lower to higher, more advanced stages of human development, a view that was clearly compatible with Enlightenment theories of cultural evolution. As a conclusion of our first part, we can claim that evolutionism had been firmly established as dominant school of thought in the second half of the 19th century in biology as well as in linguistics and in social and cultural anthropology, and also influenced the emerging doctrine of Marxism. But not all biologists, linguists, and anthropologists of the 19th century subscribed to the idea of human development in the sole form of unilinear evolution in successive stages, leading from inferior to superior stages. Apart from the fact that the idea of Darwinian evolution suffered a severe backlash in the beginning of the 20th century, the idea of the diffusion of words, of grammatical features, of culture traits, and of whole cellular organs had played a considerable role in the realms of biology, cultural anthropology, and linguistics already in the 19th century. That means at the same time when evolutionism had become a leitmotif. To give you a few examples, in 1883, the idea of endosymbiosis, which we would rather combine with the person of Lynn Margolin, had already been introduced by the botanist Andreas Schimper, who claimed that eukaryotes developed through the merger of different prokaryotes, something that has become a default theory by now. Schimper already claimed that the chloroplasts to be found in the cells of plants originated from formerly independent cyanobacteria. This theory was then elaborated on by the Russian biologist Konstantin Merezhkovsky, and only in the 1960s rediscovered by Lynn Margulis, who further developed and publicized the endosymbiotic theory. This is a topic which Matthis Krischel will elaborate on in his talk on Wednesday. Coming to linguistics, we have already seen, the unilinear model had gained the status of a default theory, but this standard theory was, however, questioned by linguists like Johannes Schmidt, for example, who in 1872 proposed his wave model of language change, claiming that a new language feature or innovation will spread from a central region of origin in continuously weakening concentric circles. This theory came into existence since the phylogenetic model of language change did not seem to be able to explain the development of some characters of descent from a proto-language. 50 years later, the Italian linguist Giuliano Bonfante presented another non-phylogenetic model, emphasizing the role of horizontal reticulations between the different subgroups, branches of the Indo-European language family. More recent critique of the phylogenetic model of language origin emphasizes the fact that the origin of mixed language, one famous example being Bugu or Maa in the Tanzanian Usambara Mountains, as well as the origin of Pidgin or Creole languages, is hard to explain by the historical comparative standard model. Reconstructed phylogenetic networks that capture both vertical and horizontal components of evolutionary history reveal, on average, 8% of the words of basic vocabulary in each Indo-European language were involved in borrowing during evolution. This is a recent finding in a paper by Nelson Sati and et al., who were also part of our team, who severely questioned the idea of a core vocabulary in different languages and unchangeable core vocabulary. Looking at the history of linguistics, it becomes evident that coinciding with the dismissal of evolutionism in biology, which took place in the beginning of the 20th century, the discipline's attention shifted from the diachronic study of languages, history, and their origin to the study of contemporary living idioms in the beginning of the 20th century. Backed by the new theoretical orientation of structuralism put forward by Ferdinand de Saussure, a general turn, where do we have him? A general turn towards the inner framework of languages was achieved within the so-called Prague School of Linguistics from the 1920s onwards. The member of the linguistic Cercle de Prague introduced the distinction between langue, langage, and parole to describe different functions of language and speech and to analyze linguistic elements like phonemes and morphemes. Moreover, Nikolai Trubetskoy and Roman Jakobson favored the concept of Sprachbund, that means the areal typology of languages, that's one, focusing on the lateral transfer of morphological features between languages, between language families, and between their subgroups, instead of vertically transferred inherited features. The idea of areal typology can be, interestingly enough, traced back as far as to the 18th century when the Swedish scholar Johan Thunman had noticed that certain morphological features, namely the absence of the infinitive, postponed articles, and a murmur vowel of similar quality, were shared between Romanian, Bulgarian, Greek, and Albanian. That means different languages in southeastern Europe, which belong to different subgroups of Indo-European. Coming to the history of linguistics, we can see that then a number of linguists like Jerzy Kopita and Franz Miklosic identified geographical areas of shared features due to linguistic convergence and developed the paradigm of a Balkan linguistic area, and this so-called Sprachbund-model was then extended to other areas of the world, for example, to the Indian subcontinent. We can see that in the beginning of the 20th century, we have a general turn away from evolutionism, not only in linguistics, as I pointed out, but also in the different varieties of anthropology, like in social anthropology in Britain, in French, Anthropologie structurale, and especially in the US, Franz Boas, known as the founding father of cultural anthropology as well as of the four-field approach in anthropology, took a very decisive stand against evolutionism, advocating cultural particularism and just denying any evolutionary development of cultures. Coming to my conclusion, I just want to point out that recent findings from molecular biology indicate that even the European bison, depicted by, for example, in the case of Altamira here on the Iberian Peninsula, may have emerged by species hybridization initiated by introgression of bison bulls in ancestral cattle, that means both species. Yeah. And as a general conclusion, we can see clearly that theories of unilinear descent in biology, linguistics, and anthropology represent just one among several approaches explaining evolutionary development in all these three realms. Antidotes to the pedigree and tree of life metaphors have been presented as early as the phylogenetic model, but have been often neglected, suppressed, or simply been ignored. Our aim in this paper was to draw your attention to these alternative models of lateral and horizontal transfer of words, genes, culture traits, which form an indispensable part of an all-encompassing evolutionary epistemology. Thank you very much for your attention.